coming. For the ones who don't know me, but everybody in this room at least knows, I'm Fritzen. I'm finally finishing my capstone project that's called The Diverse Point of Views about Yellow Fever and National Parks, the case of Brasilia National Park and Caparaó National Park, and how people understand them. So, how everything started. The things that I wanted to understand were how people, any topic, and as you know, I'm veterinarian for training, so I really cared about how public health, environmental health, animal health, human health could be interrelated, and in many aspects like domestic animals or any diseases, but I also work as environmental analyst as Instituto Chico Mendes. So to me, water is really important. So I wanted to see how people would perceive these aspects of national parks protecting or being integrated with them. And the first idea was to compare Brazil and United States, but things happen. And while things were happening here, this yellow fever outbreak started in Brazil. It was the worst in the recorded history of the country. And I thought that it was really an opportunity to come back to my roots, to what I wanted to see health associated with protected areas that I work for. So this is just for you to see that it's a very old disease that is almost forgotten. This is a song that was brought to me during this interview that we don't find. This is just one verse of the song, but you can see that they call that the walking disease. Why? Because yellow fever is never on the same spot. It moves on waves. And in 9 days, she died. So you see from this the first symptoms to the death. So it was since then, in that moment in time, probably 100 years more. So you would see that people fear them, and it was part of our culture, our history, and now it's forgotten, almost, because we have like this person that was interviewed and he or she still remembered. So I'm going to use to this presentation the structure of the document just for you to know. Chapter 1, background, objectives, methodology, results and discussion, and conclusion and propositions. So let's talk about protected areas in Brazil. Brazil is a diverse country. We have 6 biomes, and we are going to pay attention with Cerrado and very, very windletish Atlantic forest. Why? Because they are our hotspots, and they are where our protected areas that we are studying are. So, Stacy, you asked about Cerrado, but I couldn't do that, like in the document, because if I had to talk about them, I had to talk about this beauty too. But I didn't forget, we can talk hours for them because I love both of them. So, to protect this diversity, to protect the 6 biomes and the associated ecosystem, we have 332 protected areas, like I said, review protects that. This is new information, like from June 2018. They are all of them. Most of them are in the Amazon. So if you don't know, Brasilia is in the middle here. Caparaó is this one. And, oh yeah, and 74 national parks. So this is how yellow fever. We eradicated yellow fever in 1942. In the urban areas. And you can see that in 1998, the health ministry was considering these endemic areas and no-risk areas. But the years passed, and we see that the disease that was here in the midst of the Amazon, part of the Cerrado, was going back to the ocean, going back to the shore. So Caparaó that's here was considered 20 years ago a non-risk area. Brasilia was already a risk area. But things were changing. In 2001, they had this outbreak in Minas that made this a very weird situation because it was based on resources and other problems that we know, like the budget. Espírito Santo was out as a non-risk area, even though here it was transitional, it became this weird situation for Caparaó that part of their surroundings were considered endemic and and part of its runs were considered non-endemic, and maybe this was the reason that outbreak broke loose in 2017. And you can see that in 17, after the outbreak, this area was considered like temporary, but in 2018, that's not here because it's after I went to the field. Whole country is a vaccination area, at least temporarily, because of what happened and what kept it happening. Because as the walking disease that we saw in 2018 was here in São Paulo, probably going south or going back to the Cerrado and Amazon. So let's think about the cycles very, very fast. Monkeys are in the zoonotic, people are in the urban, and here you see a rural worker that they think might be the people, the person had the connection between the two cycles, but you can change the channel by a backpack because tourists not willingly can go either way, bring from the areas that they are, even if they are not urban, but the movements of the diseases. And despite what people believe, it's not a very dying disease. It doesn't kill that much. We almost don't see. So you get the disease, you form everything, but you don't notice. So you go to the urban areas and the monkeys get sick. The vectors are different, and this is another important thing because they are here and the Aedes is in the urban areas, but it has almost no relation between them in the zoonotic cycle. But news would care more about this one because it's associated with other things than the ones that really are responsible. So the house monkeys, not people, but let's first, this is not one of the species that they proved, it was just one of the pictures of a marsupial that I had, and I didn't have to give credits because it was my own. But we know that we have antibodies for the yellow fever virus in marsupial and rodents, so they might be associated with the cycle, even though the monkey is the one that is the scapegoat, but the cycle might be kept in the wild because there are other species associated. So let's talk especially to the monkeys, our poor scapegoats. We have over 500 species in the world, 139 in Brazil, 35 of them are endangered. And among the threats, we have many, but the zoonotic diseases, because they're so close to humans, are part of them. So we have this genus that are Alawata, the howler monkeys. They are the one that are most affected. They die from that very, very fast. But we have like the sapajous, the calitrix, the sabus, many other species that die but not in the same intense. More like humans, they get sick but they get cured. And we have 3 of the species in Brasilia National Park and 5 of them in Caparaó National Park. 3 of them, all of them in Brasilia can get sick. 4 of them are known to die in Caparaó in the last outbreak. The good thing that is the most threatened species that we had there that are the northern moriqui, the Bractelis hippocanthus, was similarly not affected by the outbreak. So if it was sick, it got cured, which considered that's the most threatened monkey that we had in the Americas. Pretty cool that it survived. Okay, social representations. And it's going to be a really long slide. So one of the definitions is that it's a set of values, information, and let's read that because then I'll go from there. So it's values, it's ideas, it's practice that serve to establish order and facilitate communication. And why is this important, the values, the order, and the communication? Because we have different social groups. So we think that we are communicating, but we have different sets, and we do not. And another thing that's really cool is consider that we have 2 universes, the reified and the consensual. The reified is the science. So you have to have right. You have to be a doctor to talk about diseases. You have to be an engineer to talk about structure. You have to be something related to that science to be allowed to talk and to speak. But we know that this doesn't happen. And we have the consensual universe, the common sense, the social representations, where everybody can talk about the doctor did it right, the doctor did it wrong, why this construction is done right or it's wrong. So this is really important because even though some people think that you have to have this background, we know that doesn't work like that. I'm veterinary talk about social psychology, just for one example. The familiar and the unit unfamiliar is really cool because everything that's unfamiliar makes you want to know. It gives that tickle that I want to understand. But you'll understand that how? By anchoring object and objectifying. Anchoring is get that the idea tickles you. You want to see that. And objectifying is a process of making this unfamiliar familiar because you make that you use something that you already know to turn that familiar. You anchor and you keep that familiar. The example that I gave in the document was God. God is the Father. But if you think that for an atheist, God is a myth, right? And then comes the dimensions and the social groups, different religious versus people that are atheists. They have the representation. God's the Father, God's the myth. They had the other two dimensions, the information and the attitude. They both have the same information, Bible, friends, family, but it's the attitude that changes it. One believes God is the Father, and one believes God is a myth. It's a game, it's a lie, depending on their own attitudes. And this is what I wanted to work with all dimensions because I thought that just knowing that God's the Father and God's the myth was not enough to understand the complexities of the groups that I studied. So one way to understand, especially the dimensions of the field of representation, is to use the central core because social representations evolved all over the years. And you have another thing that to me was cool because every time that I think of central core, I think of an atom. The nucleus, the core, neutrons and protons, and the electrons are the peripheral system. And they are surrounding them, protecting them. And boom, sometimes you change the core, you get explosion, you get a bomb. So the central system is related to the memory of this group. It's history, it's stable, it's coherent, it's rigid, and doesn't change easily. And the peripheral system is the one that allows for individuality. It protects the central system, and it's more mutable. You can work with them. Before, they became immutable to traditions. And why I like the social representations here in conservation? First, because we have different social groups. Then, because it helps you to understand very easily, if you make the right questions, you can understand very easily how the information is going, how people are perceiving, how people are understanding the same topic. And you can measure all over the years. You can use the system to see if people are changing, if what you're doing is enough. If you're not doing something, you can have this baseline that helps you to work with conservation with different topics. The objectives, finally got through the background. Because it's going to be long, people, sorry. So the things that I wanted to know was to understand the central core of the social representation of 3 groups, because it's more than, in this case, we're talking about diseases, so you have many, it's multiple, it's variable. So when health pros, the park pros, and I call them the neighbors because it was the shortest word to describe them. I wanted to know their information, how they form the central core. And I want to know their attitudes, because with the same information, they might agree or not. So, as you can see now it's better. Brasilia is here, Caparaó is here. One is Cerrado, one in the Atlantic forest. Both were established in the same year, 61. They had these problems with the definition of the limits because, not Caparaó, but Brasilia had this definition in 2006, but the management planning, it's older, so not everything is in the area, and the fact that they changed the limit later, it still has some context, it still have some problems. And it's important here for this context, Brasilia not only has the monkeys, but in 2007, they had a scare of yellow fever. Monkeys died, and people thought it was yellow fever, and they had many measures. And Caparaó, 10 years later, had the outbreak happen. So as I said, we have the study groups, the neighbors, the health professionals, and the vet professionals. And what was my criteria? So this is a exploratory study. So my criteria was, they had to be in Caparaó during the outbreak, 10 years for Brasilia because of the scare that happened, or be a professional in the study area nowadays, because I can't make people from health pros to stay in the same area for a long period of time. And this was the most important. People like to talk, people are willing to talk, people that wanted to be there. And the sample, so after I found that, I used snowball convenience. I started with snowball so you can see that, how it made that. So 40 people, but sometimes the arrows would go to dead ends. So I had a short period of time. I asked to use, I was there, the person was not there, they was not willing to talk. I was going to find somebody that was willing to. Yeah, this was 59 people that I interviewed, with lots of people that I had to talk, like this one, just for example. I looked to the internet, I got the wrong address, I found a person that had a son that was willing to talk. If I didn't get the wrong address, I would never found that person. So sometimes you just get lucky. So interview protocol analysis. I did this, use it free listing and semi-structured questions. Free listing was the central core. I used it prototypical analysis the 4 quadrants. And semi-structured questions were either one. So it were either DHC, similitude, or content analysis, depending on the question, depending on what I wanted to know. Usually, for these two here, if I had 75% retention, that I can explain later that because it's really cool. I use this because it's better. But if I couldn't use that, I have this like background, like this background. And some questions were so quantitative that it wouldn't make sense to use this truth. It was not a discourse, it was really a question that I could count. Finally, we got to that point. So this was exploratory. I wanted to see the social groups, but I didn't want to consider them a social group if they were like only men or only women. I couldn't call a neighbor that was just men. So I tried to find, with the constraints that I had time, the people referring them to. I had a really great range of people with diverse ranges. The health pros were the ones who had a little difference, but it goes with our health pros in Brazil. We have more women who work in the health sector than we have men. So it was pretty much, I can't say that statistically, but pretty much looking from here, I got what I wanted from them. So Brasilia National Park, these are the pools of agua mineral. This is the club. There's this where people would. It's amazing. It's a great park. And we use it 3, we call stimulus words that would prompt the questions and word some expressions. So one of them was Brasilia National Park, the second was yellow fever, and the other one was monkey. And monkeys, they like trees. Just to see this picture. They come here. And if you know anything about monkeys or that they are really smart. And they know how to open purses. And they like car keys and cameras. Just so it's really close to the trees. We have monkeys very, very close to the population in a possible area with pandemic yellow fever. So it's a risk. Not happen, but it's a risk. So let's talk about the central core. Prototypical analysis is what we got from all the groups. We see that the central core, the central system of the neighbors is preservation, and the health pros preservation too. And the park pros didn't have a central core on this analysis. But I think that it's important to say that first, authors said that sometimes the real core might be on the first peripheral. And considering, again, not statistics, but it's a 0.07 difference that would come from this one to this one. So Cerrado might be, and we need confirmation, the central core. Same thing with water. If one more person would say water, might be here, but contrast zone says more about subgroups in the bigger group. But so they didn't have, but it doesn't mean that it was not there. And sometimes you have like, look at that and know that maybe you got that wrong, or you would use a different method would be changed. But I think that what's important here, like what people think when they listen Brasilia National Park. It's important, it's necessary. Animals in care. To me, it's a little bit too detached. There's no pools, there's no specific animals, there's not it's bureaucratic when I look at that. And when you look at the information, you're going to see that makes sense. Again, the health pros, conservation and preservation. They are definitions, they're confusing. And they have Cerrado as the first peripheral, and to the park pros, water. So Brasilia National Park is one important source of water for the federal district as a whole, and they know that protecting the springs helps them. So the neighbors, what we see, try to be really fast here. We don't go there, people cannot access because of preservation. Preserve the Cerrado. It's important for the city of Brasilia. It's in the middle of people. You don't see connection. They don't have the information. They just know that Cerrado, they know that it's preservation, what this preservation means to me. And that we see in the central core. When you look at that, and you look at the information that they have, you can think that they live close by, but they don't go. And the park is open. Why that happened? And I don't know, but it was really interesting when you see classes. So what are the classes? They change segments, and these segments are close together with what's similar and what's not. And the most important, they know that it's important to preserve, but they don't have access. So it's a trade-off. I don't know if they like or not. The health pros. Do you know the pools? Do you know the monkeys? That's the thing that they most care about. They know about the pools and the monkeys. They know that animals in this case is domestic animals. And at the park, we know that the park has a recreation area and preservation. It was the only group who talked about human beings on this equation, even if human being was like making problems, but it was the only group who remember us there. And they think of the springs, even though they didn't use water to them. The springs here, you can, if you make an effort, I can see from here, you can see like the rivers and the core going to the dam and to the pools. And the park. This is a conflict that we saw in the neighbors. Brasilia grew. It's coming close to the park. It's encroaching. And I have to protect that They think that, again, preservation and recreation in Brazil is really important to the recreation of people, especially people who has no money because it's cheaper than have access to a club. Brazil is really important to them. But the viewers don't go. Why? It's first protect the Cerrado of the, they are really humble. It's not the whole Cerrado that we saw, it's really big, but it's in this area. They have problems because the city grew, they have problems with poaching, and they know it's a water source for the federal district that we sit on the central core. So before going there, there was no death of monkeys in Brasilia National Park. Actually, there was one that one person knew and called. So naturally, people would say there was no difference. But I was there asking questions. Something might be going on. And I was like, every time I was feeling like, I'm going to hell if hell is this, because I'm making these people scared about one very scary disease when they are like my control group to see what's happening. So we have lots of, I don't know. It might be because they didn't care, because there was not happening, so they didn't care, but it was maybe because of me. And we, as researchers, will have to be aware of that we might be doing some harm. We might be scaring people. And at the end of the interview, I was pretty sure, hopefully they understood, but I was pretty sure saying there was nothing happening here. Nothing. Be safe. You are good for now. But nothing. I don't know. It's a disease that it probably has no problem because it's an urban area with a very high level of vaccination. So they probably are safe. But after that happened, that I live here. There's a street here. A guy died from yellow fever, and he was vaccinated in Brasilia. But it was one person. Why? That was something that about immunity, but it didn't spread. But when you think about that, like my house, my small apartment, in the other block, a guy died from yellow fever later, and he got there. So we don't know. But like considering risks, it's a little risk. And again, there was no yellow fever in monkeys, or even deaths. The question was about deaths, not yellow fever killing monkeys. So there was none. There is a relationship between the park and yellow fever in people. Mostly said no, but the ones who said yes said it's no, but yes, because it can happen. It can be something that's happened in the future. So we can associate yellow fever in the park, but not with something that occurred. And if considering that, we see that this is so theoretical. If there is a fact behind, we would agree with closing the park. And keeping the coherence, there is no correlation between the park and yellow fever. So we do not agree with closing the park. Things that happened there. It was temporary, and I said temporary. And people were saying, you should not close the park, you should not close, as it was forever. And cool thing, people would say, yeah, you have to close the park forever in any reason. Even the neighbors. Why? Because they don't go there. To them, it doesn't matter. At least to these two people, it doesn't matter if you close. So maybe decrease the impact. Comments. So we see that central core for neighbors and the health pros are related to preservation, but for the first ones, it's more about prohibition, the other is recreation. So you preserve to have fun, you preserve because it's forbidden. There is a slight difference, but it's important. Neighbors have very general information about the park. They really, it's a feeling of being detached. They don't know exactly what's going on there. All three groups have the information about the springs, but the only one who form a representation, because it's really important is that they are way away, were the park pros. So the park pros, they knew there was no deaths, so there was no impact. Which at least the group that works there knows that. And they did know, like I said, know between know and I don't know. I might be the one who confused them. And we see that people weren't really comfortable with thinking of yellow fever in the park because it's a new concept. People do not think of diseases and how this proximity, even it's in the middle of the city, people don't think of parks associated with yellow fever or even other diseases. So it was a little difficult to see that, to see this relationship. Yellow fever. So we see that central core, danger, concern, death. The central core of these people that are in the city that has no problem of yellow fever are so scary. They have fear. To the health pros, they work with what? Diseases. So it's a disease. And it's a disease that leads to death, but it has vaccines associated with monkey. Not necessarily monkey causes yellow fever, we can't make this relation, but like monkey can be the alert, the sentinel, we can use that. And the park pros are in the middle of them. They think of diseases, but they also think that people are uninformed about that, and that's when there's the danger, the concern, and death. Again, information, how did they form this core? So, here we have many people saying they don't know if monkeys or mosquitoes were the ones responsible for yellow fever. They don't have the information too. But they know that Brasilia is not a threat because you get the virus on Paraguay River trips. And you have to take the shots. Even in endemic areas, since the beginning, you had to be vaccinated. And very early in your life, you have to take the shots before travel to some regions. And the cause are the bites, the mosquito bites, they got there. Is the animal or the human being? It's dangerous. It looks like dengue. This is turning the unfamiliar familiar because they get the disease that's gotten by the Aedes, but it's not the Aedes. Not now, not at our country. But people really associate the virus, the disease, to dengue. And they know very little about the outbreak of disease because there was no outbreak at least happening there. To the health pros, vaccine, really important. It was in 2 classes. One of them, there's just this word belonging there. So it was not. Vaccine was so important that it would be associated with so many things that they couldn't make a connection. This, the vigilance of non-human primates before the outbreak happened, is something that health pros have to be aware. We have a system of surveillance where monkeys die before we do. So if you know monkeys are dying in many settings, many monkeys die at the same time, you know that it might happen an outbreak. You can protect people with vaccination. But it was the strongest class, but it was talking about just one person. So, two people. 2 people talk about this. And it was so important to them that it looks like the whole group knew, but it's not true. That's why you have to go back to the interviews. You have to know everything. You can't trust blindly any software or even your own code. They know that the mosquito bites can get you the disease. The monkeys are associated to the human beings, to the disease, and how the yellow fever is transmitting. They know the sylvatic cycle, they know the urban cycle, but it's not in the depth. Park pros didn't have enough information to get to that classes, so we used this similitude analysis. It got 6 islands, and each island is associated with each one, but they have a meaning of themselves. So first is mosquito, like mosquito bite transmit. To be the yellow fever might be in the mosquito. The disease here is associated vaccine. In the epidemics can protect you, maybe it doesn't go there, and you know how to catch the disease. So this is what they know. They know about the mosquito, they know about yellow fever might be a disease, and they know that vaccines protect you from outbreaks. Here, because there was no outbreak, we can see like most of people were favorable. But who works with health know that this vaccine is a live virus, and it can get you the disease even if you don't have, if you have like a low immune system, you can die from the vaccination. So you have to wait. It depends. The vaccine is amazing, but you have to weigh the risks. So they were the ones who knew that. When you were going to talk about the risks to people that are absolutely favorable to vaccine, what do? You say, yeah, it's risky, you might. It's hard. It's a different language. Explain this, what's going on there. It's confusing to people that already are scared. And they have the time to think it through, to think the vaccine, you have to weigh the risks. Their source of information, most of media. They go, but the Health Pro follow a protocol, they work with health organizations, they have hierarchy, so they also have the same percentage of a source of information come from the media, but from the health organization. So from everything that we had, I used the media to see if they trust it or not. Another problem, so you have the vaccine. You know there are risks, people are favorable, media, our neighbors too. And the neighbors trust the media. The Health Pro do not. How do you work with that? And the Part Pros, it depends, which is awesome because it looks like they know what they're doing. They know I can trust some source, I can not trust some source, but you rely too much on you to know this person is telling the truth. This person is lying. Earth is flat. That might happen too, like in this case. So it depends, it's a good thing, but at the same time, be careful, rely on yourself, like who is telling the truth? Who, and what's true? What's true? Like, let's go to philosophy because we can go over and over this. So we see the central core overlap among some groups, like the diseases, or even not the same words, but they have similar meaning. These people have some overlap. To the Part Pros especially, and the neighbors, it's really scary. People don't have the information. That scares them. It's even the core. So if you think that it's rigid, immutable, something that causes that, something that you believe that you don't have the information is on your core, how do you work with that to make you believe that you have the information? Because you already have this block. Say, I don't know. And you explain and you explain and you explain, I don't know. Because you, in your core, in your heart, you believe that you don't know. In this case, you can see that the information reflects on the representation. So they have the lack of information reflects on the scare, the information on the Health Pros reflects on what they know. The vaccine we talked, how do you work with that? You know that's risky, but people are afraid. Like, again, I didn't have the information, but I thought it was interesting to say. There's this story that people tell that in 2007, this guy died because he took too many shots. He took 4 at the same day. He was so afraid of dying from yellow fever that he died from the vaccine. Because the monkeys died in the park. This, again, this is something that I'm not sure, but the information is there, circulating. So, true or not, and which is true, that happened. People know that this guy died because he took too many shots. Because of the monkeys that are in the park, and they were not with yellow fever. What's our responsibility on that? And you don't like the media, what your neighbor do? What do you do with that? Use them. Go with the pens and see what happened to make you so distrustful of them. The monkeys So I forgot to say, this is the howler monkey. This is howler monkey in the Espírito Santo because we have many species. It's not in the park, but it's the closest one that I found there. It's not the one that I have in Brasilia. So, monkey, you see that there are less information that are less words in the core that are related, but you see that for the neighbors, it's an animal. Okay, it's an animal. Not close. But it's an animal which is smart. It's a good thing. They think it's a smart animal. It's not a scary animal. The half crow, that's smart, goes to the central core. So to them, it starts a step ahead. It's smart, but can cause diseases. It's associated with diseases, I can say that causes. But it's funny. Oh yeah, it's really fun to see them running with the car key, with the person close to you in the pose. The proud pros, they think of nature. These animals do not belong in the zoo. We can think of them. They are beautiful, they are smart, they are a group, they are a family. But it is group because it's a technical term. And they think of the visitation of the national park, the pools, the monkeys stealing the keys, the food, hurting kids. So they are a problem, too, to them. But they couldn't say that what they don't think as a problem. They think of the job description. To them, we did not perform any questions about what they knew about the monkeys because it was related to yellow fever. So we thought about deaths of monkeys in the past that did not need to be related to yellow fever. People would be adamant saying, we did not have deaths of yellow fever in monkeys. Yes, I asked about deaths in general. But they knew. And really important to see 70% of the park pros knew deaths of monkeys there. And again, in the present, no increase, at least in the surroundings of the park, there was no increase in Brasilia. No increase. Awesome. I don't know. I was there. Maybe that made them confusing. And this is what made that poor guy maybe die from yellow fever. This was the case of the visitor who killed monkeys because they were eating baby birds, and I'm sorry. The deaths of the visitors because they were, sorry people, let's focus again. This guy didn't like monkeys. He would go to the pools and he would give poison to the monkeys with food because the monkeys were used to that. And many monkeys died at the same time in the pools. In an area with yellow fever is endemic, that never happened. Park was closed, mass vaccination around, people got scared. We don't remember neighbors, so we have 2 neighbors and 2 health pros who remember that, but 6 of the 7 who answered, they remember talking about the same case. It's related to their history. It's their representation. They know that happened. But you look at the whole story, you see that you get pieces of the information of each one. It's not completely together, and if I didn't talk with every one of them, I wouldn't know. So the guy was caught in 2009 and still not finished the process, but he's not allowed to go back to the park. So the stories of the park managers, like how they would use intelligence and think and see what was going on, it was almost 2 years, like 1.5 years until they got him. And maybe a guy died because of these actions. Because he was informed that these monkeys were exotic, invasive, and they were eating the native birds. So how do we get the information out? Monkeys transmit yellow fever. This is important because we had lots of people say, it's not guilty. Okay, it's not guilty. Perfect. But does it transmit? Most of them said no, but we have many ambiguous. Like people say, it does not transmit. But if it transmits, people are really not sure. going back to yellow fever of the neighbors, if you remember, because I'm sorry, they said, we don't know if it's transmitted by the monkey or the mosquito. It gets here too. So thinking about transmitted in guilty, just to see that you have islands, you have the animal is to blame or not to blame. The monkey has associated with yellow fever, but they know that they get sick, but they don't know if they transmit or not. Again, the question was guilt. So naturally, guilt wasn't, because the answers would use that. Their answers were like, either was to transmit or not, but they were not to blame. And why? And same thing, our pros, they are not to be blamed for getting sick. And monkey gets yellow fever. So monkey gets sick, but it might not transmit. And why it's important? Because sometimes you know it's not guilty. You know it's not to blame, but it's threatening my family, and it's less. It's an animal. It's not human. It's not me. So I'll kill them, even though I know it's not to blame. And you have to think of the word that you use, the information that you are going to get to them, because what you're going to do, maybe say it's a victim. Why don't try to change that to see what would be useful to these groups? What's useful to them? And here, because there was no outbreak, people wouldn't know anybody who would think monkeys are to blame. The information here was like, people, what do you think about people blaming the monkeys? It's too pointless, because it's either they would justify, say, yeah, they don't know, they don't have the information, or be outraged. Some people would like say that they need punishment. And just one person on the Peripherals showed compassion to these people because they were afraid of, even if they knew they were afraid and they didn't blame, they would hurt. Finally, the comments from one group, one side. So we saw that even with the disease, we see that the health and the Peripherals have a positive attitude towards monkeys. But if you can change, like, instead of thinking of disease, thinking of alert, think of sentinels, think of being useful would be a good way. And since it's on the periphery, you can think you can change their view. The history of the groups, the Peripherals lived to a death of monkeys. People blame monkeys is not in everyday conversation. So they don't know, but do not know because they don't know, because they never talk to them, because there's no, it's not a prompt to conversation. And let's try to reinforce what's positive that we saw. It's smart, it's a group, it's family. Caparaó National Park. Second side, pride and joy. I hacked the Bandeiras Peak. This is me stepping on the the third highest peak in Brazil. So just fun fact. I had better pictures, but I'm really proud of getting there. Again, Caparaó National Park, yellow fever and monkeys. To them, we see that the central core to them is water. It's really important to water. It goes to many basins, and it has lots of springs too. It's beautiful. It's home. Conservation. Tourism. Tourism is important to say because we think of frequency, the lowest frequency, the average frequency would be 7, but 12 people mention tourism as things that they associate with the park. But it was hacked lower, so it was not in the central core. But was not, or it's another situation that the first peripheral should be here. We don't know, and I'm really, when I see that, like, the water was spoken just for 7 people and 12, I think that we should use this as a step to understand what happens there, because it might get to conflicts. But the health pros is nature, it's care, it's preservation. Many of the words we see that have similar in Brasilia, it's also tourism to them. It's beautiful. bandeiras speak. People really, like, it's what's calling to the park is bandeiras speak and subsistence. But it's more than your salary, as we are going to see with the information. So what we see, the classes here associated many economical with ecological importance. So the one that they spoke most were like, had words with animals, species, but all economy. Why? Because it's rich and it's diverse. They know the park before the park was park. The families there are really old. They know the main attraction, so people know what's there. It's not important because it's important. It preserves the attractions. Yes, it's in between Espírito Santo and Minas. That are two states, and to them it's really important. Tourists come to see, it's there. And people feel a sense of abandonment by an institution. Sorry about that. And people resent the ones that know the park before it was park, did not get money for the land they were not paid. And this resentment is still in the States. They have pros. People like to visit the park. Cool. We know the bandeiras speak. It's there. It's there. You can't deny, and people know, and the surrounds, they know more. Like the pools, are there in the park, but people do not associate it much. It's between Espírito Santo and Minas, and you can access from both sides. Tourists come accessing from both sides. We live in the Caparaó region, close to the reserve, the park. They call the park as reserve. It's important to preservation. It's gorgeous. It preserves air, water, fauna, and flora. So this is what they know about the park. The park pros. Remember subsistence? It's life. It's a way of life. It's their life. Working there is a mission, and it's shown in their information. We know the park and the surroundings, so they know the bandeiras, they know the waterfalls, they know the places, they know the communities. It's important for the visitations. Seriously. It protects the mountains of Caparaó, and it's between the states of Espírito. Like, it's things that everybody says when talks about this park is situated between the Espírito Santo state and Minas Gerais state. People got that, people, move forward. It's important to the social development of the territory, and it's important to the economy. So people either live from there from coffee or from the tourism. So everybody knows that, and it really shows in the representation. Here, we see there was an outbreak that was an episodic outbreak, so people didn't die much close to the park, but the monkeys did. The alouata is probably very close to extinction there because they found one up. So really cool about niceness of people. I interviewed this person. This person said, there's no monkey here. I got back to my parents' house. They called me to say, I saw one. It was with da. It's a male. We should find a female for him so we can repopulate. And I was really afraid that gave you wrong information. It was like I couldn't use on the analysis, but this person made such an effort that I have to tell. So they found one there, and there's possibility of populating. We don't know. So they saw monkeys dying and affecting the visitation. Why? Because the visitation was closed for 15 days. But what's really think of emotions and filters is that the neighbors said no difference. Were they wrong? No, because the visitation broke record last year. It's already broke record considered, because the question was the whole year until I got there. It was over 54,000 people went to the park, even with the park closing. But the park pros knew that because they talk about that. But they felt that saying there was no difference would minimize the only closing of the park in its history since '61. So that's why they said it. So you think of information, you can start thinking about filters, about what's raw. They knew that, but they couldn't say there was no difference, as they said. And they said because there was no change in visitation when you consider the whole year. They got it right. So to me it was really, really cool to see that we cannot deny that happened, even if the numbers say otherwise. And park and yellow fever in people, they did not see relation between them. So we can go with no. And they agree with the closing. Why was that? Because you would think that would happen like same thing that happened in Brasilia, because there is no correlation between the park and yellow fever. But they would agree. And one of the things that I thought was because the park was closed, there was no relation. So they would back up the decision. The close avoided having a relation. And some people would have like mixed feelings, like they agree but they didn't want to. And people would say like, if you're vaccinated, there are other means of protection. You shouldn't close. No shared central system, but you see overlapping with the peripheral zones. The information is partially aligned with each other, central and peripheral, so people would know. You could see that when you look at all the information that they have, you can see that they talk similarly to some things, like this nature with the university. The bandeira speak was there, this thing of Espírito Santo in Minas Gerais. And it's important because of two states, two rules, two things. And one thing that's really important is people that we saw, like we are from the Caparaó region. People have pride from being there. But when you ask about the park, we did not see this pride shown in the park because they have this differentiation of the Caparaó park to the Caparaó region. We are from Caparaó to the Caparaó park, at least for the park pros. No, sorry, health pros. And the impact on visitation. So people would know, people wouldn't know, but many would not deny that happened. And it was scary, like even if there was no record, even if the visitation didn't suffer in the end, it was terrifying because it closed to them and how to move forward. With already feelings hurt because they were not paid for the land. Yellow fever. So, they think of mosquito. Cool, right? Maybe. They think of vaccine. Fear, disease, the monkeys and bats. They fear health pros. Again, same thing. Disease is what they work for. Fear, prevention. The park pros, monkeys. Monkeys were dying inside the park. To them, most important thing. But also, vaccine, fear. Fear was for everyone there. Why? Because it was unexpected. And even then, fear felt that. But we don't see this information that we see in Brasilia. So, people feared they were dying. And they wanted the vaccine. They know mosquitoes, monkeys, the Aedes aegypti. This is a problem because it was not the Aedes that was transmitting there. They know mosquitoes transmit, and they really feel that vaccination is an important thing. Vaccination. Vaccination again. The problems with information, because we saw that the health pros had these protocols, they would have this information, and they would get confused. They have the cycles with mosquitoes, monkeys, and people. So the mosquito bites the monkey and bites an infected man, they get sick. But the mosquito has edges. So here we see that they look at the holler monkeys, not just monkeys, the holler monkey, they know that. They know that survival cycle. They know that they got scared when the death started. They know Emagogus was related to that. They know the urban and survival cycles. And they know yellow fever got the primates. If you could see like the three groups, we see that they talk about the same thing. But it looks like this, it's very small compartment of the other two groups. We see that the health pros and the neighbors were much more similar than the park pros. Vaccination. There's no consideration for risks because it happened. It was happening. So everybody was favorable. You couldn't think of the risk, oh, let's weigh the risk. The risk was so high that they couldn't think of that. Even the health pros were scared. Source of information. So here we use it both health organizations and media because which one the health pros look at more at the health organizations than the park pros and the neighbors, but they both were the second option. Again, they do not trust media in general. Neighbors depends, park pros depends, but they trust health organizations. So it's important, and because you have a small community, you might think of health centers giving you the information. We see these concentration areas, neighbors and health pros would talk more similarly than the park pros because of the differences. When people talk about mosquito, they all think of Aedes and Aedes aegypti, not the Emagogus, which results in a problem because some solutions that people pointed out was like, well, either you won't go to the areas, to the natural areas, which is impossible because the mosquito fly and comes to your house because we're close there, or they say, let's wait with stagnant water, let's kill all the mosquitoes. It's possible in urban settings, but not in the nature. So when you think of this kind of the association is a problem, the information that they have is not technical, it's what they have, it's what happened, it's what they suffered, so it's all related to the situation. And vaccination was a no-brainer because, seriously, it was happening. Monkeys, again, it's an animal, it's an animal, it's in nature. It's cool that they thought about the muriqui, so because it's a very important monkey, and they associate with yellow fever. Remember peripheral elements, the change? Probably because it's really close to what happened, they associate with the disease. And when you look at the park pros, they also think of nature. They don't belong to the zoo, and they think they're friends. So it goes to home, you know. It goes to their, it's closer to them than just a simple animal. That's in the past, nobody knew about anything happening. And they saw increase. Low increase because people would know that some species were more affected than the others. But to them, really high. Even if it was one species that was completely decimated. Why? Maybe because they would not differentiate monkey as monkey. Maybe because it was frightening. Again, because of that. From these things, monkeys die from yellow fever. Everything here points to that. That's what they know. With the health pros, yellow fever, but humans were killing them. and not killing just by poison or beating them up. They were transmitting other diseases. One health pro talked about that not only the monkeys were dying from yellow fever, but they were dying from killings, and another disease happened at the same time there. So, because they didn't have enough problems already. Because of that, they knew yellow fever, and they knew that it was the Holland monkey. That was, even with the question being because of that, they got this little detail. The monkeys transmit yellow fever? Most have said no. But you have ambiguous answers. They do not transmit, but if they do, or they would explain in a way that was confusing. Go there. Again, monkey. Everything is related to monkey. It's confusing. It's incoherent. There's no uniformity. So, like, they think they call him poor thing. Get hurt. Again, it's not to blame, but it doesn't necessarily do not transmit, or transmit, or have ambiguity. And the peripheral, they are dying. They shouldn't be blamed because they're dying. And they knew people blaming the monkeys. And they knew in person. They knew this, really knew these people. But the park heard about it. Of course, it's not easy for somebody to confess that the monkeys were to blame and they would kill them. But other people here maybe trust them enough to tell them, yeah, the monkeys are threatened by other people. Again, this is like, they would either think of justifying or being angry at them, but all groups would show compassion, at least one. And what I think about that is because they knew these people, they knew they are good people, they wouldn't hurt them if they weren't afraid, but very little. So, difference. Monkeys are animals versus monkeys are friends. It's close to home. Yellow fever is already in the periphery in this group. It's the peripheral, it's changing. Let's not change for good. Everybody knew that they were dying from yellow fever, even if, as a group, just the health pros, not that they talked, every group talked about yellow fever and other causes of death, but when you think about 32, 21, and 6 people talking about, yellow fever showed what just the health pros showed as a whole. Most of them did not transmit or were guilty, but the neighbors were not uniform, so some people would think. And what is important is careful with ambiguities, because when I read the documents and the transcripts, what I see, looking at everything, that many people who would be classified as ambiguous were not being ambiguous, but the discourse was. So when they were saying things, what might be confusing for people that are already afraid. So think of how you're going to get the information. Just like, so this is the one that I'm going to get the example, and I went fine. So I think like that. If they are not the orange, they don't not organize this thing. They don't arrange. Let's bring yellow fever to that folks over there. Let's go. Let's. That's what this person said. Like, they were not arranging that. But if you say that to a person, it doesn't say that the monkey has no relationship. It says the monkey did not choose to do that, but he might be responsible. Conclusion. Sense of belonging, Caparaó region, Caparaó National Park. We talked about that. We have to be aware. In Brasilia, sense of belonging. Neighbors do not belong to the park, they understand, but it's a lot of, many more people. That's maybe more few, no. It's a lot of people who live in surrounds of Brasilia, so it's hard to make them closer, but it needs to be addressed that people from far like the park more than people who live close by. Closing the emotional impact. People knew, but they knew and they had to say that that happened. The closing didn't have less impact, at least last year, but people were really afraid. We should be careful with technical terms. Vector, host, reservoir, preservation, conservation. People are so focused in using the terms right that they got that wrong. In Brasilia, you can work with prevention first because that never happened, and you see like the core of the representations were more minimal, it's easier. In Caparaó, you have to address the past because that happened, and then talk about prevention because it's still too fresh. And many people were like, yeah, we shouldn't talk about this anymore because it passed, but it can come back. It's a walking disease. And let's build from the information that they already have. Because instead of focusing on the urban and sylvatic cycles, let's see what they know about them. Building bridges. Why? Because it's not just yellow fever. We have many other diseases that are there. Leishmaniasis was one that people would say, I didn't ask, but people would insert in the conversation. Why? Yellow fever? What? Leishmaniasis is starting right now. So why not use them? They are also mosquitoes, different mosquitoes, and they know it's not the same of dengue. So let's use our time better instead of talking just about leishmaniasis, just about mites, just about worms, just about yellow fever. Let's talk about all of them together. Why not? And Brasilia, let's talk about Brasilia National Park too. To them, it's possible. So tailor the source of information on each side. In Brasilia, too many people, they trust the media. Let's work with them. Why not? In Caparaó, they maybe trust, but they do trust the health centers. Let's use them. And what is red here is because it should be on the document. It's not. I saw that later. So it's going to be inserted, but I thought it was too important to. Yeah, let's pretend that it did not happen. To me, similitude analysis was important to use when DHC was not available, but this is better. Not only because it gives you the classes, but you see exactly what each class, what people said in each class. So you can, it's easier to do the post-analysis. So you know, in similitude, you have to look at the whole text to think and find what they meant by the links. And don't underestimate the power of content, because sometimes you need easier information. You need fast information, you need to quantify, use content. Don't be afraid, don't think that because it's a computer and it's you, it's not going to, you're going to have bias. But I saw that there were some biases because people are more shy and outspoken. People who speak more naturally would have more text to be analyzed, and sometimes, at least on what I saw here, maybe it doesn't have every time, but at least what I saw, it might make some mistakes of analysis. And even if you fix that, because many people would say, so mosquito bite the monkey is bitten by the mosquito. Even if you take one off the equation, if the person just said that, and another person explained everything about the mosquito bites and the cycle and use mosquito a lot, this person is going to be more unimportant. Every time you go to the interviews, it takes longer because of that. But every time that I did one analysis, I would go back to see what it meant and how you might got that wrong, especially because we have no and yes. So some of the contents were together, but meant different things. Monkey did not transmit, monkey transmit, it was together. Social representations are on the move. So they are not settled, they are not immutable, they are almost. This means the analysis need to be faster, not 1 year as it happened to me. So, because it changed already. And São Paulo, the vaccine that was this panacea on both sides, it's terrifying to them. They are not getting the vaccines. So it changed it from side to side. It would be helpful if I could do this it's faster. So how we should speed up this process of analysis? I made lots of questions as exploratory. I don't regret them. But after looking at all of them, I would use just the central core for the park, for the disease that we are studying, and the animal that we have to protect. I would use the information, but just the general information, like what do you know about the park, what do you know about the diseases, and I would think of attitudes like guilty versus transmitter of this animal, or anything that was closer to that specific disease. Why? Because it's faster. And the animal, as much as vaccination is one aspect of the disease and one aspect of the protected area. So it's the bridge. So I didn't have to go through all that. And of course, if there's something like this fear or the closing or go with that, go exactly what happened. Don't go far from that. And source of information, because sometimes it's better to work with the health center than with media. Sometimes media is best. Sometimes you should talk with the leader, the community leader. So you should, in thinking of communication, you should understand these complexities, and that's it. I would 80%, no, 70% of what I asked would go. Like I wouldn't need that. To me, it was really cool to use the social representations and to use the 3 dimensions, because many people use just the central core because analysis is fast. But it's really important, at least for the context of conservation, understand how they form that. How the same information that we saw many times, the information were similar, but dealt and resulted in cores different. So I felt that was useful. I felt that if we could speed up the process, would be better. But it was important. And the last one, if you don't want to use this for diseases, you can use like national parks and visitation. Why not? It's another way to use the social representations to understand some complexities of the national parks. So these are the sorts of pictures that I didn't take. Thank you. And when I mean thank you is thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with me for longer than I needed. And thank you for everyone who fed me, everyone who lent me cars that I'm working on the list. But first thought was to thank everybody here. But I couldn't because I was afraid to forget somebody. So not today, people, but people, like seriously, people would give me car keys because they didn't want me to rent. People that I never met would say, no, you're going to have lunch with me. So it was really, really special. So I can't name my interviewees, but they were amazing. So thank you, my interviewees. And I won't say names because, yeah, today I'm going to be dishonest and I won't tell everybody. So now, questions.
Thank you, Carol.
Oh, thanks. I'm sorry for... Well, now, at least not 2 hours. Okay.
All right. Questions from anyone?
How many people did you interview altogether?
102.
Like, huh?
102.
Wow.
43 in Brasilia, 59 in Caparaó.
That's incredible. That's a lot
Yeah.
for one person.
Yeah, that's why it took so long, and it's why I wouldn't do that again. Like, no, I wouldn't. I would like this. I could do, but it would need a team. The good things of doing by myself is that I would follow the same criteria. I wouldn't put my touch. Like you have to do this, and if I change it midway, I could change because I would do that, change everything by myself. I wouldn't have the problem that telling Stacy, I decided that it was not good what I was doing. That similitude analysis would be much faster with content analysis. We have to redo that. I would do that immediately. So that's what was important in doing by myself. But it was too long, and I know it was too long. And I know it was like deep, it was big, but thinking of my work, thinking using that there, we have to use what I said, like trim it down, make it easier, make it simple, and work in teams. Have that very well oiled.
If you, so with your neighbor group, if you would, what's sort of the concise recommendation to that group based on everything that you did, all the variety of beliefs, or beliefs that aren't actually true and things like that, who they
Yeah.
trust, like, what are the key messages, and who's delivering that?
Okay. So it was different on each side. Brasilia, first thing, know the park. Work with them to know the park. Before we start to think of diseases, we can use diseases as a prompt for people to understand the park. Like, you are there talking about diseases, they will see another aspect of you. But first, know the park. Use local media to them. About yellow fever, use that as a group of other diseases, of zoonotic diseases, because it's too little and they have other problems with that. They have dogs coming in and they transmit diseases to the animals that are not related to people, but people leave the dogs in the park. Caparaó would be address what happened, say how many monkeys died, what came from that. The park didn't suffer with visitation for long. You should be afraid, but not so much. It might come back. And then work with prevention with the other zoonotic diseases. Because the difference between them is the belonging with the parks. Brasilia people do not belong. Caparaó people belong to the region, and the park is part of that region. So they already love that area. It's easier, but it's trickier because if you love somebody, you know what's best for them too. And sometimes you have laws and you have other concessions that you cannot make that make this love different. So that would be my